Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. Silence and solitude. There is a silence that is not simply the absence of sound. It is heavier, denser, and almost physical in its presence. It presses against the skin like air thickened by storm clouds, demanding attention and resisting dismissal. Most people flee from this silence because it does not feel empty, it feels alive, as though it watches and waits. It is the kind of silence that halts the mind's endless chatter and forces us, almost against our will, to turn inward. Carl Jung understood this silence deeply. To him, it was not a void but a fertile space, a kind of psychic soil where the most profound battles of the human soul are waged. It is here, away from the glittering distractions of daily life, that we come face to face with truths we have long avoided. Jung knew that solitude was more than being physically alone. One could be surrounded by people and yet remain solitary if the mind dared to step beyond social noise. Solitude, in its essence, is the collapse of masks, a stripping down until nothing remains but the core of who we are. From the moment we are children, society trains us to avoid such stillness. We are taught to stay busy, to fill our time with entertainment, companionship, work, or endless goals. We learn to fear emptiness as if it were death itself. To sit in silence without distraction feels like standing on the edge of a dark abyss. For many, the abyss is terrifying because it reflects back the raw truth of our existence. When everything external is stripped away, we are left with only ourselves. But who is that self? When the world falls silent, the stories we tell others, and the stories we tell ourselves, begin to lose their grip. The professional roles, the reputations carefully crafted, the polished image projected to friends or family, even the opinions we defend passionately, all begin to blur in solitude's mirror. What once felt like solid identity often proves to be performance, and beneath it lies someone we hardly recognize. Jung described this moment as the fragmentation of the persona, the social mask we construct to survive within the collective. The persona is useful, it allows us to function in society, to play roles expected of us. But it is not the whole truth. It is like a suit of armor that protects but also confines. In silence, cracks appear in this armor. What we thought was me begins to feel strangely hollow, as though borrowed from others' expectations. The first instinct at this realization is often panic. To admit we may never have truly known ourselves is unsettling. Many rush back into distraction, into noise, into the comforting lies of busyness. Yet Jung insisted that remaining in solitude, bearing the weight of this discovery, is essential. Only here can we begin to encounter the living essence buried beneath social masks, the self that is wild, creative, and untamed. There is something sacred in this process. In solitude, far from the stage lights of daily life, the psyche begins to create its own imagery. Symbols arise unbidden, dreams deepen, and answers that cannot be reached through logic alone begin to form. Jung described this as the mind's capacity to generate the raw material of transformation. It does not happen under the constant gaze of others, where we are pressured to appear coherent or strong. It happens in private, in silence, in the space most people avoid. The paradox of solitude is that though it feels hostile, it is profoundly generative. What seems like emptiness is in fact the soil where new life takes root. Yet to reach it, we must endure the discomfort of silence. We must resist the temptation to numb ourselves with distractions. This endurance is not easy. It demands patience, humility, and the willingness to face questions without immediate answers. And here lies the paradox: while solitude may at first feel like separation from humanity, it ultimately leads us back to it. By peeling away the false identities imposed upon us, we discover that our pain and longing are not unique. They echo the pain and longing of countless others. Solitude, then, does not isolate us. It returns us, by a truer path, to the heart of the human condition. Jung believed that ignoring the call of silence condemns us to live half-lived lives, forever trapped in masks, forever estranged from our true selves. To step into silence is to risk collapse, but also to risk discovery. It is an invitation to return not as who we were, but as who we are. And so, the journey begins not with answers but with a question. Will we dare to face the silence, and in it, face ourselves? The fall of the persona. Every human being wears a mask. We learn to craft it early in life, at first to please our parents, then our teachers, later our peers, and finally the wider society that demands our performance. This mask, which Jung called the persona, is not false in the way a lie is false. It is more subtle than that. It is a structure, a carefully assembled facade composed of our opinions, mannerisms, styles of speech, even our preferences and dreams. Much of it, we later realize, did not originate from within us at all. It was borrowed, absorbed, or adopted from others' expectations. The persona is necessary. Without it, life in society would be impossible. The mask allows us to move through the world, to work, to socialize, to belong. But as Jung warned, when we mistake the mask for our true face, we fall into the greatest of deceptions. We begin to live not as ourselves but as characters in a play written by forces we do not control. For years, sometimes for decades, we carry out this performance, until one day, silence arrives. Solitude has a ruthless honesty. When the noise of the outside world fades, the scaffolding that props up the persona begins to collapse. The compliments we chase, the approval we crave, the roles we perform, suddenly they lose meaning. Stripped of an audience, the mask trembles. And then, in the deep quiet, it falls. This collapse is not gentle. Jung compared it to a symbolic death, and those who have experienced it understand why. It is like shedding skin down to the rawest flesh, or like standing unclothed before a mirror for the first time, seeing not what we present to the world but what has always been hidden beneath. The experience can feel like betrayal. We realize that much of what we defended with passion, the convictions we wore as armor, were in fact costumes stitched together by circumstance and necessity. Panic often follows. For if I am not this mask, then who am I? Many cannot endure this question. They flee the silence, rushing back to distractions, desperate to glue the fragments of their mask together again. To them, solitude feels like annihilation, as though without the persona, nothing remains. But Jung urged us to stay, to endure the shattering. Because what dies in that silence is not the self, it is only the performance. The mask protected us, yes, but it also confined us. It kept us small, predictable, safe within limits where nothing truly alive could grow. Its collapse, though terrifying, is also the first real freedom. Think of it this way, the persona is like a room we have lived in for so long that we mistake its walls for the horizon of the world. The furniture is arranged neatly, the windows carefully dressed. We know where everything belongs. But in solitude, the walls suddenly dissolve. We find ourselves under an open sky, surrounded by questions without answers. At first the space feels unbearable, because there is nothing familiar to cling to. Yet it is precisely this openness that allows something new to emerge. The fall of the persona is, then, a necessary dying. Jung insisted that without this symbolic death, the true self can never be born. The persona can protect us, but it cannot create. It can shield us, but it cannot reveal. Only when it shatters do we find the possibility of a self that is not borrowed, not adapted, but genuinely ours. Still, the passage between the mask's collapse and the self's emergence is not immediate. There is a gap, a liminal space Jung called the creative void. And this is where many falter, because it feels like walking into nothingness, like hovering over an abyss without guarantee of return. Yet it is also where the greatest transformations of life begin. The journey is not about discarding the persona forever. Society requires masks, and we must wear them. But the difference is profound. Once we have faced their collapse in solitude, we no longer mistake them for our face. We learn to wear them lightly, aware that beneath them lives a deeper essence untouched by the world's gaze. To reach that essence, one must endure the fall. One must dare to let the mask crack and crumble in the silence. And though it feels like death, it is the threshold of rebirth. The creative void. When the persona collapses and the mask of identity dissolves, what follows is not immediate clarity. There is no sudden arrival of a new, shining self to take its place. Instead, what greets us is a strange, vast, and disorienting territory. Carl Jung called this the creative void, a psychic landscape where the old has been dismantled but the new has not yet emerged. It is a place of suspension, where one floats between worlds. Imagine drifting in an endless sea with no horizon, no compass, and no shoreline in sight. That is what the void feels like. The familiar landmarks of identity, the roles, beliefs, and stories we once clung to, have vanished. And yet nothing new has appeared to guide us. It is a space that feels both empty and overwhelming, threatening and pregnant with possibility. The temptation in this void is to flee. To grasp at distractions, to rebuild the old structures as quickly as possible, to cling to anything that offers stability. Many do. They rush to reassemble the mask, even if it means returning to a life that no longer feels real. But Jung warned that such an escape kills the very seeds of transformation. For the void, as terrifying as it seems, is not barren. It is fertile. It is the dark soil where new life can begin, if only we have the courage to remain. This courage is not easy. The void exposes us to nothingness, and nothingness has a destructive power. In its presence, even the will to exist may falter. Language begins to fail, thoughts fragment, and inner images become more vivid than the external world. Jung knew this state well. He lived it intensely during his retreats in Bollingen, where he recorded his inner visions in the Red Book. He described the void as both destructive and creative, a crucible in which the psyche, stripped of its illusions, reorganizes itself into new forms. At first, the void feels like chaos. Old certainties are gone, and new ones have yet to take shape. Questions arise that have no immediate answers. Who am I without the roles I have played? What does it mean to live, if not to fulfill expectations? What remains when everything I thought was essential has dissolved? These questions burn, demanding attention, and yet they cannot be solved quickly. They must be endured, lived through, allowed to work their slow alchemy within us. This is why Jung insisted that the void is not a stage to be avoided but a stage to be embraced. To flee is to abort the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, authentic self. To remain, however, is to open oneself to creation. The void is a womb as much as a grave. In its darkness, fragments of new identity, new symbols, new possibilities begin to stir. Jung suggested tools for navigating this state. Active imagination, allowing the unconscious to speak through images, dreams, and symbols, can transform the chaos of the void into raw material for growth. Deliberate silence, practiced not as absence but as attentive listening, can reveal the subtle movements of the psyche. Even asking questions without expecting answers can be powerful, for it trains the soul to wait, to endure, to trust the unfolding process. The paradox of the void is that while it feels like destruction, it is also the beginning of creation. Old answers lose validity, but in their absence, new truths prepare to surface. What once felt unbearable, the sense of being lost, undefined, suspended, becomes, with patience, the very condition that allows something genuinely new to emerge. This is why Jung called it the creative void. It is frightening because it strips us of control. It is fertile because it opens us to forces larger than ourselves. To remain in it is to consent to transformation, to allow the psyche to dissolve and reform in ways we cannot predict. And so, those who endure the void without fleeing discover something astonishing. From nothing, paths appear. From silence, voices speak. From darkness, light emerges. The void, once feared as annihilation, reveals itself as a threshold, the space where destruction gives way to possibility, where death gives way to rebirth. To reach the self, one must pass through this strange, uncharted territory. And though the journey is perilous, it is here, in the heart of the void, that the soul discovers its power to create anew. The laboratory of authenticity. If the creative void is the womb of transformation, then solitude becomes the laboratory where this transformation takes form. It is here, in the absence of external judgment, that the psyche reveals its most hidden contents. Solitude, Jung taught, is not simply a pause from society, it is an inner chamber, a workshop where the raw materials of the unconscious are brought to light. In this psychic laboratory, we encounter the parts of ourselves long censored, suppressed, or buried. At first, the revelations can be unsettling. Stripped of the persona, we no longer play roles to satisfy others. Without an audience to applaud or condemn, impulses that once lay dormant begin to rise. Desires we thought improper, fears we believed conquered, fantasies we had denied, suddenly they emerge with startling clarity. A person known for gentleness may discover currents of anger surging from within. Another, proud of rational control, may find themselves overtaken by mystical visions and intuitions. These are not illusions. They are the neglected fragments of our being, clamoring for recognition. Jung understood the human psyche as a stage on which countless characters perform. Many of these actors remain hidden when the persona dominates, silenced by social rules and self-censorship. But solitude lowers the curtain on performance. The suppressed cast steps forward, and the play unfolds in all its contradiction. To watch this drama without judgment, to let each figure speak, is the essence of authenticity. This confrontation is not comfortable. It is easier to believe we are coherent, consistent beings. To admit that we harbor anger alongside compassion, or irrational longings beside reason, feels like betrayal of our carefully managed image. Yet Jung warned that what we refuse to acknowledge does not disappear. Instead, it retreats into the unconscious, where it shapes our behavior indirectly, sometimes destructively. The shadow, ignored, exerts power. The shadow, recognized, becomes energy for growth. Thus, solitude becomes an act of courage. It asks us to face the abysses within, to look at impulses we would never dare to confess in public. It is not about declaring them good or bad, it is about accepting them as parts of a larger whole. Authenticity is not about purity, it is about wholeness. It is about embracing contradiction and imperfection as integral to being human. This authenticity is forged through trial. Alone, with no witnesses, we can experiment with versions of ourselves that society would quickly condemn. We can feel anger without acting it out. We can entertain wild dreams without ridicule. We can admit to fears without the need to mask them as strength. In solitude, no one watches, and so we are free to be ugly, poetic, irrational, or grandiose, and still remain true. From this laboratory of authenticity, gifts emerge. The artist who believed themselves uninspired may find a hidden wellspring of creativity. The timid may discover boldness, the hardened may discover tenderness. By allowing the shadow to speak, we recover powers long exiled. The self, once fragmented, begins to knit itself into a more integrated form. But solitude alters more than just identity, it alters our relationship with time. Jung observed that in deep solitude, past, present, and future blur. Memories once forgotten surface with vivid clarity, while glimpses of possible futures intrude like whispers from beyond. Time becomes circular rather than linear. Old themes return, not to torment us but to be re-examined with new eyes. This temporal fluidity allows us to converse with the child we once were, to listen to the elder we may yet become. In solitude, we realize that the self is not fixed in the present moment but stretches across the span of our entire existence. This is why Jung saw solitude as sacred. It is not a withdrawal from life but a deeper entry into it. By daring to step into silence, we find that the self is larger, stranger, and more alive than we imagined. Authenticity is not a static condition, it is a dynamic process, a continual dialogue between light and shadow, past and future, chaos and form. And so, solitude is not simply escape. It is a practice of radical honesty. In its chamber, the fragmented self is reassembled, not into a flawless image, but into a living whole. This wholeness is imperfect, contradictory, and profoundly human. Yet it is only from such wholeness that genuine freedom can emerge. Mortality and freedom. At the deepest level, solitude compels us to face the truth we most avoid, that we are mortal. When the distractions of life fade and silence grows absolute, the awareness of death creeps into the room like an uninvited guest. In those moments, one may hear not the outside world but the inner pulse of blood in the veins, the ticking away of time itself. For Jung, these encounters were not incidental, they were essential. To him, the confrontation with mortality was a psychological event of the highest order, capable of reshaping a life. Most people spend their days building barriers against this awareness. We fill time with work, pleasure, possessions, and endless plans. We rehearse futures as if they are guaranteed, hiding from the fact that all futures are fragile. But solitude tears away these defenses. With no noise to shield us, we are left exposed to the blunt fact that every hour we live is an hour closer to the end. What, then, are we doing with this brief span of existence? Jung understood death not as a final biological event but as a psychic presence, always near, shaping our choices even when ignored. To live without acknowledging death, he believed, is to live superficially, as though life were a stage play without consequence. But to accept death, to allow its reality into consciousness, is to live with urgency and authenticity. Solitude sharpens this truth. When alone, many report a chill, an inexplicable heaviness, or an anguish larger than any they have felt before. It is the psyche's way of reminding us that nothing we love, people, dreams, or possessions, will last forever. At first, this awareness can be crushing. Some fall into nihilism, convinced that nothing has meaning if all ends in death. But Jung argued that meaning does not vanish in the face of death, it is born from it. Knowing that life is brief forces us to ask, what matters enough to fill this finite time? Solitude becomes the ground for this existential inventory. It is here we see clearly which battles are not truly ours, which ambitions were borrowed, which relationships never touched our hearts. This confrontation strips life to its essentials. Suddenly, the trivial concerns that once consumed us lose their weight. In their place, clarity arises, about who we love, what we value, what we must do before time runs out. Jung suggested meditative practices to deepen this confrontation. One was to reflect consciously on impermanence, to see everything, objects, emotions, achievements, as temporary, not to provoke despair but to awaken gratitude. Another was the last day method, to imagine, with full seriousness, how we would live if today were our final day. Such exercises dissolve the false comfort of masks. What remains is luminous clarity, raw and undeniable. Yet solitude's gift is not only the awareness of death. Paradoxically, it is also the glimpse of something eternal. Many who endure the dark night of solitude emerge with a sense that while the body is finite, there is a deeper continuity to which we belong. Jung himself, in his solitary retreats by Lake Zurich, often felt a profound peace, as though he were embedded in something vast and timeless. Whether one names it soul, self, spirit, or collective unconscious, the experience is the same. Mortality is real, but within us burns a spark that cannot be extinguished. This double vision, of death and eternity, leads to the final truth of solitude, freedom. If we are mortal, then every choice matters. If there is in us something indestructible, then every choice also echoes beyond us. Together, these truths place the burden of radical responsibility upon our shoulders. We are free to shape ourselves, but we are also accountable for what we become. To live in solitude is to feel this weight fully. It is to recognize that no one else can live our life for us, that no mask can carry the burden, that no distraction can erase the fact of finitude. And yet, far from crushing us, this realization liberates. For once we accept death, we are free to live. Once we accept responsibility, we are free to create. Thus, solitude leads us not into despair but into possibility. It strips us, breaks us, confronts us with mortality, and then hands us the raw materials of freedom. From this crucible emerges the authentic self, imperfect, fragile, finite, yet alive with a spark of eternity. It is in this paradox, Jung believed, that the deepest meaning of life is found, that only by facing death do we truly learn to live.